Hi there, everybody, and welcome to the December edition of The Dome at Home. Thanks for being patient with us as we delayed our show from 7 o'clock. I traveled from the planetarium to my top secret basement studio to get this show done in, about 13 minutes or so. It was quite a rush. It's great to be here. Nice to see everybody checking in. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas to those of you that celebrate Christmas. And, hey, Bob from sunny South St. Vital. Is it still sunny where you are? I hope not. That might not be the sun. It's great to see everybody. We have the end of the year show, and it's an hour and a half late, but it's also 7 days early. Normally we're the last Thursday of the month. So, anyway, it's that time of the year. Schedules get all messed up and lots of things are going on. I hope that you have lots of fun things happening at this time of the year and not too much stress. For those of you, well, you watch this show, so I'm assuming you don't mind the darkness all that much. I know some people are already hoping that the sun will return and give us longer days, but I'm not one of them. Although it's been so cloudy that it hasn't really mattered. I think I'm on 40 consecutive days without even touching a telescope or anything like that. Although after the show, I noticed it was still kind of clear. I might pull something out at the end of the show and go take a look at Jupiter or something like that. We'll see if it's still clear at that point. I don't know if it will be or not. We have lots of stuff in the show today. Hi, everybody. Just lots of folks checking in. Nice to see you all. This is really good. Okay. There's a few folks that we haven't seen live for a while in there. I wonder if the later start time actually works for some of you. Check in the comments if you like the 7 o'clock time start, or if you like the 8:30 time. We did experiment with different times. Probably about a year ago, we were doing the shows later in the evening during the summer so that we could try and do things while it was dark, so that if it was ever clear on a show night, we could actually do it from outside and use cameras and telescopes and things like that. Didn't work out all that much because, of course, as soon as you plan something, the clouds roll in, and that's the way it is. But let us know what you think about the show time. All right, let us take a look at the things we have this week and this month to talk about. It is the winter holiday season. And I just came from the museum. The construction is up around the north side of the building still, so you have to come in around the side of the building, but our winter programs are running. After Boxing Day, there's what we call pajama days, where you can bring your family in their PJs to the museum. And there's lots of things in the museum, the science gallery, and the planetarium. And you can find all that information on our website. But the shows that we're running are a couple that we've talked about, I think, before. Look at that. This is what happens when you rush in and you don't get everything all organized, is that your links don't work. Excellent. That's really wonderful. Let's get that fixed. There we go. There you are. Okay. The longest night, the long hours of darkness are a big feature of this time of the year, and there are lots of stories about it. And one of them we tell in our program, The Longest Night, which has some really charming kind of puppet characters in the planetarium show. Not actual puppets, but video of puppets up on the dome. And it's a different way of using the planetarium, and I think it really, really works well. And we also have our Aurora show. People associate Aurora with winter, and that's kind of unfair because really Aurora doesn't happen any more often in the winter than at other times of the year. It's just that it's dark so much more in the winter that you have a better chance of seeing it. If the Aurora happens to happen on a random hour of the 24-hour day, well, in the summer, that's likely going to be daytime and we won't see it. But in the winter, there are so many hours of darkness, you just have a much better chance of seeing those aurora. So I think that's where that association comes from. And certainly over the last number of years when the sun hasn't been all that active. But now that we're in active times, we're in the solar maximum, there's a lot of aurora happening, and it's become much more common. And we'll have the generation that are sort of getting to know the sky now will think aurora is something that happens fairly frequently, whereas those of you that started getting to know the sky, say 5, 6 years ago, or even a little bit longer, probably didn't see aurora very often at all and think that it's a very rare thing that you have to chase down and be in exactly the right spot. There were times during a previous solar maximum where I almost got sick of the aurora because it was up all night long, every single night, and it was so bright that you couldn't see through it to see anything else. And, it seemed like a little bit too much of a good thing. So you can learn all about how that all works and the cycles and so on in our shore aurorae, which was actually produced by our colleagues at the Montreal Planetarium. And they did a great job of putting that together. Okay, we had an event happen on Tuesday, and Tuesday night, the moon was near Mars, and as they rose, they were fairly far separated. But as the night went on and as they rose higher, the moon in its orbital motion around the Earth got closer to Mars. So a little bit later in the night, the two of them were actually right next to each other. And then by the time they were ready to set the next morning, which is actually when I saw them, the moon had moved past Mars and was quite a bit separated from it. Now, it was cloudy the night before, or the night of, so I'm not sure. I haven't seen too many people in Manitoba that saw them at their closest, but we did have a number of people that saw and imaged the pairing afterwards. This is a shot in the morning at Assiniboine Park by my friend Ashley Cherney. The moon and Mars there over top of the snowmen that people built out in the park there. Beautiful shot. And I got this text early in the morning. What's that by the moon? I love those texts. And I knew the answer. Here's a shot that Gia Walker took. She was telling me about the new lens that she was working on and playing around with that. And it's tough to actually image both of these things at the same exposure because the moon is quite bright. And if you want to get a good image of Mars, you really have to sort of you have to overexpose the moon. But Gia, you also sent me a great picture of the moon that you took separately, so I just sort of popped it in there. And this is how modern astrophotos are made. No one takes a picture and then puts it out there. They're what are called composites, where you put together different exposures and so on to reproduce what our eye can see. It's kind of amazing. We think the cameras are the sensitive things, but our eye actually has such an amazing range of brightnesses that it can see all at the same time. You have to work hard with a camera to be able to reproduce that. So anyway, Gia, I hope you don't mind that I popped those two together. You can have that picture as well, although you can do the same thing, I'm quite sure. But anyway, it's a beautiful shot. I'd like to hear more about that lens because it looks like a good one. Roy Jemison also got some shots there. Here he's got the moon and Mars just over my shoulder here. Nice shot there. And you managed to sort of straddle the exposure to give sort of the detail on the moon and still record Mars at a decent level. That's really, really nice. I like that. And you can see the detail on the gibbous side of the moon, where the shadow is on the right-hand side there. There's like a big crater there that is filled with shadow and sort of bites into the moon there. Really, really striking image. Nice one. Good stuff. And oh yeah, that's right. You took, Roy gave us two shots. Here's one at, I think it was a little bit after 7 in the morning. And this one was taken about 8 in the morning. And they're both at the same scale, but you notice that they're farther apart because the moon is moving to the left here compared to Mars. So even over the course of an hour, we can see our moon's motion. As long as we have something like a background star or planet to use as a reference point, you can actually see this motion almost in real time. So that's really cool. We normally only notice it when we've got a bright planet or star right next to it. So thanks everyone for sending those images in. We've also got, Ulrika has sent in a number of images. We talked about satellites last week, and we talked about the Solar Sail spacecraft. And so Ulrika went out and shot it. And so here we have, this is with the cell phone. And so I brightened it up a bit to make it visible on the stream. I hope I didn't make it too bright for you. But there's a star right up above my head there. And there's a star at the same height all the way over that way, near the edge of the frame. Those are stars. The one in the middle and down a bit is the solar sail spacecraft. And so if we look at a picture taken just shortly thereafter, there we go. The stars are both in the same spot, but that bright one in the middle has moved. That's the solar sail spacecraft as it orbits around. It's a big mylar reflector, basically it looks like tinfoil, and the pressure of sunlight, which is really, really small, is collected by this sail, and it adds up enough that it's able to make the spacecraft move around, which is pretty cool. So that's something that we'll be able to see if you go to heavensabove.com. That's where I get all my satellite information from, and it's a great place to see some of the things that are visible. Ulrika also sent this picture. This is at a Science and Technology Museum in Germany. This is the Buran space shuttle that the Soviet Union made back in the 80s, modeled on the American space shuttle. They didn't know what the Americans were going to do with their space shuttle, but they knew it couldn't be good, so they made their own. And because physics is physics no matter what kind of government you have, it looks very much like the American space shuttle because it had the same kinds of job. You'll notice that there's some engines at the back there, jet engines, because this is one of the test models that, and it only ever flew once up into space without a crew, and then the Soviet Union collapsed. And so the Russian space shuttle never flew again. But I've never seen a close-up picture like this before. I've only seen, some of the old ones that show it from a distance or whatever. So thanks very much for that. This looks like a really cool place to visit. I don't know when I'll get over to Germany, but it's on my list. Thanks, Ulrika. Okay, oops, I revealed one of my top 10. So we're coming up to the end of the year. What does that mean? Well, nothing really. We've got a calendar that, starts on January 1st, and that means it ends on December 31st, but that's an arbitrary date. Like, we know that the calendar represents the Earth going around the sun once, so a year is the amount of time that the Earth takes to go around the sun. Kind of, because the year has to be an even number of days for it to work as a calendar. Otherwise, your clocks get all messed up. So we say it's 365 days. The Earth actually orbits the sun in 365 and a quarter days. And so every 4 years, that quarter day is added up and it becomes an extra day, and we have a leap year, and that keeps the calendar mostly in step. And there's a few other corrections. It's actually a little bit more complicated than that. But other than that, the starting point is kind of irrelevant. I mean, it's a circle. We're going around the sun. How is one point as a start any more valid than another one? It isn't. So New Year's has always been one of those holidays that I've never quite got. Like, I understand things like Hanukkah, where it's a commemoration of something that happened on a certain date, and so you celebrate that date. Christmas, it happens around the time of the winter solstice. And so the winter solstice is something that is, based on a certain part of our orbit that has some meaning to it. So it makes sense. And there are many other examples, all the spring festivals that happen around the first day of spring. I mean, even Groundhog Day is a astronomically based holiday. February 2nd is one of what's called the cross-quarter days. The Celts didn't use the solstices and the equinoxes to mark their calendar. They used the points in between, which are called cross-quarter days. And so you'll see in a lot of Celtic or neo-pagan kinds of calendars, those are the dates that are done. So Groundhog Day comes from one of those. New Year's Eve doesn't come from anything. It's not even the same New Year's Eve that we celebrated all throughout history. It's not like the calendar always began on January 1st. It used to begin March 1st. It used to begin April 1st. There are places that still have their fiscal years starting April 1st. I wonder how far back that dates if it could possibly date back to the time where New Year's was celebrated around April 1st. And it was just every year they would say, oh, we should adjust it to the new calendar year, but that would be a real pain. Let's just leave it. And it's just stayed for who knows how long. Anyway, it is New Year's. And even though that, to me, I never really got that, it's the time where we reflect back on the whole previous orbit. And it's also the time when people release top 10 lists, which is another thing I don't get. Why 10? Okay, because we have 10 fingers, right? Okay, fine. But why not 8, 11, 14? I mean, why does it have to be 10? I'm overthinking this, aren't I? Yeah. Okay. Let me get back to my top 10 list of celestial and space events for the year 2025, which is the next year, for those of you that were uncertain. I didn't put these in order of priority, like number 1 is the best and number 10 is the worst, because they're all pretty good. I actually put them in kind of chronological order. So number 10, the one that we're starting with, happens first in the year, and number 1 happens later in the year. Well, kind of, you'll see. I don't want to spoil it. This one is kind of a holdover from 2024, though. I mean, I'm going to go and look at it tonight. Jupiter. Jupiter is spectacular in the sky, so I'm told, from all my friends that live in places that have clear skies. It's at its closest and brightest at the beginning of December, but it's still very close and very bright and visible all night long. Like it's up nice and high as soon as it gets dark now, and it sets before the sun rises, but so late in the night that it's not really a hassle. If you're not someone who wants to stay up all night till 6 in the morning, you're not really going to miss that part where Jupiter is not visible. It's an amazing planet to observe. With the unaided eye, it's super bright. With a pair of binoculars, you can see some of the moons, like we're showing here, these little dots lined up on either side of the planet. In a small telescope, you can see the stripes crossing the clouds. You can see the Great Red Spot there at about 3 o'clock, just inboard of that closest moon. There's just a little, it's called the Great Red Spot. It's actually kind of the mediocre pale salmon spot right now. But yeah, it's shrunk over the last couple of decades. But anyway, we call it the Great Red Spot. It's visible in a small telescope if it happens to be on the right side of the planet when you're looking. And you can find out all that kind of information by consulting something like Stellarium, which we'll be using a little bit later in the show. We don't have to just look at it with telescopes, though. We've got a spacecraft called Juno that is in orbit around Jupiter, and it loops in really close and gets some really good pictures, and then it loops far away to send those pictures to us and to recover from the intense radiation that is in close to Jupiter. Jupiter has a lot of radiation belts around it, and the spacecraft has to fly through them to get the good pictures, but it doesn't want to spend all of its time in there. So it loops way back out, spends some time farther away from the planet, which might seem wasteful, but it's essential because of these radiation belts. If you want to see some amazing surreal art, go to the Juno page. Just Google Juno spacecraft, NASA, something like that. And you will see some amazing images, real images of the clouds of Jupiter that look like they were painted or just imagined by an artist. They're just beautiful. All of these swirls and little storms and cloud bands and turbulence and things like that, just breathtaking images. You could take most of the Juno images and frame them and stick them on the wall in any art gallery in the world, and they would hold up. Juno's also been taking images of the moons of Jupiter. There we have Europa in the middle, and sorry, that's not Europa, that's Callisto. 4 of those moons are large enough to see with binoculars, and so we've been getting some amazing images of these things. Over the next little while, we're also going to see the moons of Jupiter passing in front of the planet and casting their shadow on the planet. And there's a few times, particularly at the end of January into February, where that happens with more than one moon at the same time. So if you look through your telescope, you'll see the normal view of Jupiter, but you'll see these little black spots on there that will move slowly over the course of a couple of hours as they cross the planet. That's a particularly interesting time to check out Jupiter. We'll talk more about those on the January show, because February there's something like 12 or 14 events over the course of that month. We'll talk a little bit more about the times and how you can see them. And hopefully if it clears by then, we can do some live telescope viewing too. Anyway, Jupiter is one of the objects that you don't even need to wait for 2025. You can head out and observe, in fact, right now. Stop watching the show, go outside and look at Jupiter. I'll wait. Well, I won't, but the recording will wait and you can watch me later. Number 9, robots to the moon. This is dipping into the cool space stuff here, but this is something that's going to be happening a lot in 2025. We know that the humans are going back to the moon. The Artemis missions are getting geared up. Jeremy Hansen, Canadian astronaut, is going to go flying around the moon not till 2026 at this point. And then the first landing will be 2027. But before all of that, the robot recon team will be going. There will be at least 8 robots launched to the moon in 2025 by a variety of countries and a variety of companies. Whether it's Firefly Aerospace or Intuitive Machines, who had their first spacecraft have a very hard landing on the moon earlier this year. They have their second spacecraft, Intuitive Machines 2, will be launching in 2025. The Japanese Space Agency has a lander that will be launching. NASA has a couple of landers and orbiters to be looking at the lunar surface, looking for water ice and all those kinds of things. We're going to be seeing lots and lots of live pictures from robots going to the moon. And I think that's going to be a pretty cool thing, because even if they don't fulfill their mission, these are very quickly designed, very inexpensive space missions, and some of them will fail, but some of them will bring back a whole bunch of great information and some great pictures. And one thing that we learned over the last year is that these companies that are doing these moon missions realize the value of taking good pictures. So we're definitely going to get some good shots of what's going on the moon. So that's my number 9 for 2025. Number 8, Mars. We had a planetarium show that was narrated by Patrick Stewart back just after Star Trek: The Next Generation had ended. So his voice was just in his prime, and he had this beautiful, he would just say Mars. And we would just listen to that over and over again because it was just so beautiful to hear. The red planet Mars is coming into its best right now. In fact, you can go outside right now and look off to the east, and that bright star that's just coming up, that's Mars. It's going to get better over the next few weeks. It gets to its brightest around the 12th of January. And then on the 13th of January, we have sort of a repeat of the whole moon passing Mars thing that we just showed all of your images of. On the 13th of January, oh, sorry, I had one picture here first. This is Ingenuity, or Ginny, as she was affectionately known, the first helicopter to fly on Mars. They hoped that she would fly 5 times. They needed her to fly once. She flew 70 times. And on the 70th flight, you see she's kind of on a sand dune there. As she was coming in for a landing, the foot sort of hit the sand dune, and the rotors tried to compensate for the tilt, and it was too much for them, and one of the blades basically flew right off. The centrifugal force just ripped it off and sent it away. So Ginny, unfortunately, will fly no more. She's still functioning. She's sitting there on the surface, and she's talking to Perseverance, sending weather reports to the rover that's nearby. But the rover is just about to go over the edge of the crater that they were in and will lose sight of Ginny. So this is probably the last image of that groundbreaking helicopter, the first helicopter to fly on another planet. Farewell, Ginny, and we thank you. It was quite a mission to follow and watch all of the antics of this tiny little helicopter that could. There's Perseverance, the one's taking all the pictures, and we've gotten used to these pictures of Mars, and Perseverance is still operating. There's a half dozen spacecraft still around Mars or on Mars that are functioning and taking pictures and collecting samples and things like that. And there will likely be more not launching in 2025. The next chance is to launch in 2026 for a 2027 landing or encounter. So we won't be seeing new Mars missions, but many of the old ones are still going. On the 12th of January, Mars reaches its brightest and sort of biggest in the sky. It's what we call opposition, and it's opposite the sun in the sky, and that's when we get our best view through a telescope. Now, this is a stellarium image. You won't see this level of detail in a telescope for a couple of reasons. First of all, this doesn't have any of the atmospheric turbulence we need to deal with. But if you were to look through a telescope, you could see things like the white polar cap on the top, some of these darker patches and lighter patches of the deserts and things like that. I've seen earthbound images from backyard telescopes that show some of those volcanoes on the left, for example. But if you're looking with your eye and you're not sort of a seasoned planetary observer, you'll probably see the white polar cap and then sort of a pale orange desert with maybe some dark splotches on it your first time out. But your eye gets better and better as you do this observing. Here's the other reason you don't see as much. This is a scale of the size that Mars appears in a telescope versus the size that Jupiter appears. So Jupiter, is actually, fairly small in a telescope. Mars is much smaller than that. So it's really a challenge to see details on Mars. Even though it appears bright in the sky, because it's close to us, it reflects lots of light, it's a small planet, and so seeing details on it can be very, very tough. But if you've got a telescope, or if you've done any kinds of imaging with your telescope or things like that, Mars is a great thing to try for in January because it's at its closest. And as I mentioned, on the day after closest approach, the moon will actually pass so close to Mars that it will eclipse it, or occult it is the term we use. Eclipses are usually reserved for just the sun and the moon, but the moon will basically pass in front of Mars, cover it up on the 13th around 8:15 Central Time here in Manitoba. It'll cover it up, and the moon is moving from right to left here, sort of down and to the left in the sky as we see it at that time. And so about an hour later, it will uncover Mars, but it will disappear behind the planet. So that'll be cool to watch. We watched the last time this happened, we watched it live here on Dome at Home through the telescope, and we managed to see Mars reappearing from behind the moving moon. It was pretty cool. So we're going to try that again. So that's on the 13th. But in general, Mars is one of the items on our top 10 of 2025. I haven't checked the chat for a little while here. Let me go here. Oh my goodness, so many comments. Yes. Wow. Okay, I'll deal with those time ones later. Okay. Okay. Oh, it's an alliteration, top 10. That's why is that really why we do top 10? You're probably right, Ulrika. That's absolutely. It wouldn't work if it was top 9 because it's not the alliteration. It never even occurred to me. There you go. I assumed that it was because we have 10. Anyway, okay. Very good. We've got 10, 9, 8. We're down to number 7 on our reveal here, and the top 7, or the number 7 item on our list of celestial and space events, the sun. We're in solar maximum, the maximum activity of the sun, which rises and falls every 11 years or so. It's not an exact cycle, and we're not super good at predicting it. We do seem to be near the maximum right now, though. And in fact, we're way above the predicted maximum in terms of the number of sunspots, the number of flares, and things like that. And so you'll see things like the sunspots, the dark spots on the sun, the brighter parts are flares, and on the edge of the sun, we see these flames sort of poking off. Those are prominences. Those are the kinds of things you can see with a specialized solar telescope. This one's a hydrogen alpha telescope. If you have just eclipse glasses or white light solar filter, you can still see things like sunspots on the surface of the sun. This is an amateur image of basically the sun with the sunspots that were on it earlier today, from spaceweather.com. Actually, it's interesting. The satellite that they normally pull these images from has a problem. So they're getting amateur astronomers around the world to send in their solar pictures, and they're picking the best ones and using those instead of the satellite images that aren't available. And almost no one has noticed because the amateur images are almost as good as the satellite pictures they were getting in the first place. That's pretty cool. So sunspots, solar flares, all those kinds of things. For many of us, the main thing about solar maximum, though, is the northern lights. We expect to see lots of northern lights in 2025. I can't tell you exactly when. There are a few times around the spring equinox is a time where the rates do actually increase a little bit, but frankly, we're going to see a lot of them, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. Any night that you get, you start seeing pictures of northern lights on your social media feed, that's a good time to check a site like spaceweather.com or the Manitoba Aurora and Astronomy Facebook group to see if there's an outburst right then, and then just drive outside the city. You can see them from in the city, you can take pictures of them from in the city, but it's not the same as getting out under a dark sky and seeing them in their full glory. So if you haven't seen the northern lights before, I almost guarantee that you will see them in 2025 unless you're really not trying, because there's going to be lots of opportunities because of the solar maximum. Okay, number 7, the sun. We continue on our list. The sun sort of happens throughout the whole year, so it's not strictly chronological order here. Number 6, the International Space Station. I like watching the International Space Station when it goes overhead. It's a bright object that slowly moves across the sky for a few minutes or whatever. And it's cool to think that there's 7 or 10 or 14 people living on that little dot that's zooming around us up there. Right now, there's a crew on there. We had the Starliner crew that had to stay on there a little bit extra time. They've been delayed again, so their 8-day flight has now extended to what will be 9 months before they get home. But everything is working well there. And in 2025, the ISS will greet 2 brand new spacecraft that will arrive there for the very first time. So in the cool space stuff category, we have the regular Crew Dragon, that is the SpaceX vehicle that brings crew up there. We have the Cygnus spacecraft, which is a remote piloted cargo vehicle. The Soyuz spacecraft is the Russian spacecraft that's been bringing astronauts up to the space station for its entire history. On the right there are 2 Progress vehicles. Those are Russian remote-controlled cargo vehicles. In 2025, we will also see the first launch of Sierra Dream Chaser, which is a reusable space plane. It doesn't have any people in it. It's a cargo spacecraft, but it will go up on a rocket, dock with the International Space Station. They'll take out all the cargo. They'll put in all the things, the experiments and results that they want to send back to Earth. And then the spacecraft will come in like the space shuttle did. It's got a heat shield to protect it through the atmosphere, and then it will land on a runway remotely and can be reused again. So we're getting back to the idea of reusable spacecraft all over the place, which is great. So I think the first launch of this is supposed to be in March of 2025, but that, of course, is subject to change. It should be sometime in 2025, though, where we see the first Dream Chaser flight. And it just looks cool. It looks like a spaceship. It's not, some of the other ones, very utilitarian. It's this shape because it has to be. Dream Chaser looks like it could have come out of Star Wars or something like that. So it's nice to see a little bit of design sensibility in these spacecraft now. We're also going to see the Japanese cargo vessel HTV-X1. HTV is something that starts with 8 transfer vehicle, Hitten transfer vehicle. I'm blanking on the name of it. It's a remote control cargo vehicle, and Japan has flown a number of them to the International Space Station. They've completed their initial contract of developing the spacecraft and flying the number of flights they had. They've now built basically a more advanced version that can, after it is done at the space station, can remain in orbit and do its own independent experiments and things like that. And we'll be seeing the first flight of that in 2025 as well. So that's some cool space stuff to look forward to as well. Okay, we're now halfway through the list. Number 5, back to the astronomy side of things, the planet Mercury. How many of you have seen the planet Mercury? Show of hands. I can't see you. Most people have not, because it's not a planet that you can just go out and see. Like if you go outside tonight and you look around the sky, you'll see Jupiter, even if you don't quite know what it is. You'll see Mars, you'll see Venus. Those are pretty easy to spot, easy to find. Even Saturn, it's fainter, but if I tell you there's Saturn, you can go out and you can see it. Mercury is different. It's the only planet that we can see with the unaided eye that is most of the time not visible. It's so close to the sun that the only time we can see it is when it's exactly as far away from the sun as possible. If it's moving in its orbit and it's too close, it's just too close to the sun for us to spot it. So we can only see it at what's called elongation, the time when it's as far away from the sun as possible. And even that is not very far. So it's always down in the twilight, either right after sunset or right before sunrise. Well, in March, the first 2 weeks of March is the best time of the year for us Northern Hemisphere folks to see Mercury in the evening. There's a time later in the year where we can see it well in the morning as well, but I'm not a morning person, so I picked the evening one as the big thing. And it's also convenient because Venus is also visible at that time, and Venus is so bright that you can't miss it. So in March, basically you go out, you look towards the west. This is at 7 o'clock, so it's a little bit after sunset. The sky is still fairly bright. You find Venus, which is amazingly obvious, and then you look halfway to the horizon and a little bit to the left, probably using your binoculars, unless you have really clear skies with no haze or whatever. And then you'll spot Mercury. And you will join a fairly small fraternity. In fact, there are many professional astronomers. I had a university professor that had never seen Mercury, just because you have to go out and you have to make a special thing of it. It's not something that you'll just stumble across as you look in the sky in most cases. So Mercury, March, it's a great time to see it. And if you don't see it, there is a morning time that later in the year that we can get to. So that's half the list. And so we're going to come back to our, okay, Nasli, you've seen it. And Michelle, you've also seen Mercury. That's good. But yeah, it's a challenge because it's not as bright as Venus. It's down lower. I think I've seen it with the unaided eye once, and it just so happens that my kitchen window and the gap between the trees was exactly where Mercury and the moon were on one night. And I got up and I just looked out the window and I could see it. So it was really happenstance that I was able to see it with the unaided eye. I've tracked it down with binoculars a few times, but to catch it with the unaided eye, you either have to work for it or you have to just get really lucky after a long period of time like I did. Okay, leaving Mercury behind, we go onto the second half of our list here. Oh, sorry. The other thing about Mercury is, hey, there's a spacecraft going there. In fact, it's already going around the sun, and it has flown past Mercury 4 times. It's the Bepi-Colombo spacecraft put together by the European Space Agency and the Japanese Space Agency. And this is its most recent flyby. You can see bits of the spacecraft in the front there, and there's Mercury in the background looking a lot like the moon. There will be another couple of flybys in 2025, getting successively closer and closer, until the spacecraft actually enters orbit around Mercury and parks there for a few years and extensively maps the surface. We've never done that before. We've flown past Mercury with a spacecraft, and the Messenger spacecraft, I guess, actually did quite a bit of work on Mercury. Sorry, I'm forgetting Messenger, but this will be, with the newer technology and a little bit more understanding of what Mercury is like, we'll learn quite a bit about the inner planets, and so we'll be seeing some great pictures coming back from Mercury as well. Number 4 on the list, Eclipse, yay, an eclipse. Actually, 4 eclipses in 2025, but only one of them is visible from uh, Canada, essentially, or at least from my part of Canada here in Manitoba and Treaty 1 territory. There's a total lunar eclipse on March the 13th into the 14th. And all of Canada, all of North America will see the entire total lunar eclipse. So that is a night that it will probably be cloudy. But if it's not, we will do a live broadcast, and there will be many live broadcasts from around the place. Somewhere it's going to be clear. We'll be able to see this beautiful red color of the lunar eclipse. They really are striking, and they're the kind of thing that happens very slowly. So you're watching for several hours, or you're checking in every 15 minutes and seeing what's changed. So it's not like you don't blink or you'll miss it. So that lunar eclipse, this is the view on the from Winnipeg. It's there's the moon up at the top there, quite high in the south, more than halfway up the sky. So it's clear of all the buildings and things like that. And the moon does not go right through the center of the Earth's shadow, the eclipse, the cause of the eclipse there. So that means that we'll get some nice shading of different colors across the moon's disk. It won't be like solid red, but it'll be red near the bottom and then fading to orange to yellow. The color is always a little bit of a mystery because it depends on the clarity of the atmosphere all around the Earth and where it happens to be cloudy and things like that. It's basically all of the red light from all of the sunrises and all of the sunsets all around the world. That's the only light that makes it to the moon from the sun on an eclipse is sunlight that is filtered through that red sunset glow. And that's where the red color comes from. So just like we can never say exactly what a sunset's going to look like in advance unless you know exactly the weather and things like that, we just can't say for sure what the color will be like. Sometimes a lunar eclipse gets very, very dark so that it looks almost sort of brownish or even black. Other times it's very, very bright and the red color doesn't become as obvious because the brighter parts sort of overwhelm it. We'll have to see. But either way, beautiful events, wonderful thing. And this is one of the highlights of the year for sure. Now, there are 3 other eclipses. 2 weeks after the lunar eclipse, there's a solar eclipse, a partial solar eclipse that hits northern Quebec, Greenland, Iceland, and chunks of Europe and Africa. But a partial eclipse is not the kind of thing most people would travel for. There's almost always a solar eclipse 2 weeks after a lunar eclipse or vice versa. The conditions that make one also make the other. And so almost always there's one eclipse and then 2 weeks later there's the other kind of eclipse. And that happens again later in the year. There's a lunar eclipse in September that we won't see anything of from this side of the Earth. It's visible on the other side. And then a couple of weeks later, there's another partial solar eclipse as well. So of the 4 eclipses, we've got one that's going to be awesome and 3 that we won't see, except on the internet. So that eclipse makes number 4 on the list. I need a water. I did a bunch of staff training today, so I was talking, pardon me, and then I came home and talked to my kids, and then I went back to work and I narrated a bunch of stuff, and now I've come here and I'm talking, so my voice is starting to fail. Item number 3 on the top 10 list, when worlds align. We've got, as we saw with the moon and Mars just a few days ago, as things move around, eventually they get close to each other. And sometimes we don't even notice because they're faint things. But when it's the 2 brightest things in the sky, people tend to notice. And so coming up in August, in the morning sky, the brightest planet Venus and the second brightest planet Jupiter will be almost on top of each other in the morning sky. It's going to really jump out at people because it's going to look unusual. Like it's going to look like mismatched headlights pointing at you from space. And it's like that's the night where, or the morning when things will be closest. A couple of nights before and a couple of nights after, the 2 planets are actually approaching each other. So each night they'll be relatively close. And if we continue by about the 19th and the 20th, the thin crescent moon joins the crowd. The planets have moved farther apart, but you get 3 for the price of 2. So a nice set of photo ops in the summer sky in the morning there. So that's a pretty nice set of events to watch for. I'm quite looking forward to once the moon gets in there, because then you have a sort of a nice wide field view. That lens that you were using, Gia, I think will be perfect for this, because it's sort of the same kind of spacing in terms of how far things apart will be. And you can get some nice detail on a beautiful thin crescent moon, probably with some earth shine where the dark part of the moon is visible. It's going to be lovely. This will be one of the showpiece events, I think, of the year, if we get some good weather for it. This one I hummed and hawed about putting in. I put it at number 2 because it could be one of the best events of the year, but I gave it a plus and minus of 1,000 because it could also be so bad that we don't even notice it. There's another comet in the sky. In fact, it's there right now, and it's what's called a sun-grazing comet. It comes in at a very steep angle, and it loops really close to the sun and does a hairpin turn and then zooms back out. This comet is going to loop around the sun and give a very, it'll become very bright, but it'll be very close to the sun. And so when it's close to the sun, that means either you have to wait until the sun sets and then the comet is just a little bit above the horizon and hard to see, or you have to go in the daytime and hope that the comet is so bright that it's visible even in daytime. That sounds pretty unlikely. I have seen one comet in the broad daylight before. I had to stand in a place where the sun was blocked out by a building, and then I could just glimpse with my unaided eye the position where the comet was. It looked like a star, kind of a slightly fuzzy star, and in binoculars you could see that there was some structure to it. And I have also seen a comet that was bright enough that just as the sun set, it was only a few degrees away from the sun, but it was bright enough that it came through that bright twilight and had a lovely little tail and so on. I think that was Comet Austin back in 2007, maybe. It was only like that for 2 or 3 days, and then it faded away and wasn't bright enough to be seen anymore in the daylight sky. This might be something like that. Comet Atlas 2024 G3 might get bright enough that it'll be cool to see. But if it does, it will only be for 1 or 2 nights, because the geometry is actually not that great. As soon as it loops around the sun, it heads very far south, and that means that we won't be able to see it here in Manitoba. We might see some pictures from the southern hemisphere, because they get basically an extra few days to see it before it starts to fade away. More likely, though, this comet will not be visible at all. But I don't want to tell you to forget about it just in case. It's one of those things we're going to have to wait and see, and this is something that happens in January, so we won't have to wait too long. Keep your eye on this for the next week or so, and we'll try and do an update if we think that it'll be visible. I'll put some information out to help you find it. It's going to be one of those things where finding it will be the victory. It's not going to be as impressive as Comet Chuchin-Shan Atlas that we saw a few months back. That was a lovely comet with a beautiful tail, but it was visible in a reasonably dark sky, and it was quite bright and was quite close to us. This one won't be like that, but it might be. That's the thing about comets. You just never know. So it's kind of my number 2. But it might be number 1002 on the list of cool objects. We'll have to see. And my top event of 2025, I have to say that I went back and forth on what, even though I was doing this chronologically, you feel like the number 1 thing on a list should be the best thing, right? And I went back and forth. There are some cool space stuff things that I put in there, and there were some other things that I put in there, and I finally, and this is somewhat affected by the lack of clear nights, but I finally decided to go with any clear night. That's the thing about the universe. I mean, you don't need to wait for a special event. The universe is a special event. Anytime you can see the stars, something beautiful is out there waiting to be seen. And so you don't need to wait for, you know, my favorite example, the supermoon. The moon is always super. You don't need to wait for planets to get close to each other. They're cool on their own. You don't need to wait for an eclipse because the moon is always beautiful. There are so many things. Anytime you can spend time under the stars, it is worthwhile time. So rather than sort of focusing on those specific events, anytime you can get out under the stars, it's worth it. And it'll make the next time you go out under the stars better, because the more time you spend under the stars, the better your eyes and your brain get at processing astronomical information. You know, we see these pictures, and we talked a little bit about compositing, and I put the moon picture over top of Gia's Mars picture there. Our brain kind of does that too. It doesn't alter things, but when you look at something like, say, Jupiter, your eyes don't know what to do with it, because our eyes are supposed to be looking at things in the daytime. They're not supposed to be looking in little tubes in the nighttime. It doesn't quite know what to do. But if you do it long enough, your brain starts to see the patterns and, oh, look, I'm seeing these stripes there. Maybe that's the important part. And then the next time you do it, it takes a little bit less time for your brain to make that connection. And the more you do it, your brain is plastic. It will actually train itself to image process your view. And people think, oh, my telescope is working better now. No, you're working better now because you've used it more. So literally, anytime you spend out under the stars or looking through a telescope, not only is a benefit of what you're doing right then, but is also going to improve every other time you go out. So spend every hour you can under the stars. It's absolutely worth it. We're running a little late here, but I still want to get into
Cool Space Stuff!
Okay, I almost put this as my number one. I couldn't quite bring myself to do it, but the plans for Starship in 2025, if they come off, are pretty impressive. As you know, Starship from SpaceX is scheduled to be the moon lander on the Artemis 3 moon mission, which is supposed to happen in 2027. But for that to happen, a whole bunch of things have to happen pretty soon. And so Starship has a very aggressive plan for the launches that are happening. Flight Test 7 is ready to go as early as January the 5th. They've already got it on the pad and hot fired the engines, and they're getting ready to go. They're going to have to launch probably 5 or 6 spacecraft in the first quarter of 2025, the first 3 months, to be able to make NASA's schedule. Because this little spacecraft lander here doesn't just take off from the Earth and then go to the moon and then people get on it and it goes down to the surface. Oh no. It uses most of its fuel to get off the Earth into Earth orbit. To get to the moon, and it needs to be refueled. So to be able to use Starship to go to the moon, they have to be able to launch 2 Starships into orbit and have them rendezvous and dock and then transfer fuel from one to the other. That took NASA like 4 years the first time back in the old days. Obviously, it shouldn't be that hard now comparatively because it's been done before, but Starship still has not, done a complete orbit or any of those kinds of things. So either things are going to happen really, really fast with a lot of really exciting missions, or things are not going to happen really, really fast, and then we're not going to the moon in 2027. Because as much as there have been delays with the Orion spacecraft and things like that, Starship is nowhere near ready to do anything at this point. But again, they have made great strides, and we'll have to see what happens. Where's my image? This graphic probably doesn't translate very well here, but basically to get a starship to the moon, you need to launch 4 other starships to fuel that one up, because each starship uses most of its fuel to go up into space, into orbit, and so it only can have a bit of leftover fuel to transfer to the one that's going to go to the moon. 3 or 4 fueling launches, then it can go to the moon, and then the Orion spacecraft on the big SLS launcher can take off with the crew, and it can go to the moon, and the 2 will dock, and then the lander will go down onto the surface. This diagram is available on NASA's Artemis webpage, and it sort of gives you an idea of what's supposed to happen there. And here we're seeing that of the 4-person crew on Artemis 3, 2 of them will land on the moon on the Starship, and 2 of them will stay on the orbiting spacecraft. And I'm sure that there's a lot of reason behind who gets to stay and who gets to go, but I don't know if I'd want to be on the wrong side of the hatch when those 2 spacecraft separate on the way to the moon. Still, any flight to the moon would be pretty amazing. So this is what we're going to see in 2025. 2 starships in orbit landing on each other, essentially, to be able to transfer fuel. This is the long pole in the tent. This is the make or break moment for the entire Starship moon landing kind of thing. Now, with the recent political changes and the upcoming political changes, maybe all of this is moot. Maybe the whole moon mission is going to be changed with the new NASA administrator or things like that. Who knows? I mean, maybe, who knows? But these are the plans, and we hope that at the very least, our Canadian astronaut will still fly aboard Artemis 2, but everything's up in the air. And it just seems a very ambitious program to, like I say, we're going to see some pretty spectacular footage. Whether it's successful or whether things go horribly wrong and things blow up, it's still going to be interesting to see. This is the other thing that boggles my mind. Look at this is the crew area for the Moonlander. Look at that wonderful vaulted ceiling. Why do you need that much empty space? Look at all the extra air you have to carry. It's almost like this spaceship is too big for a Moonlander. I mean, it is. It's totally too big for a Moonlander, but it's what they're using. And the lander for Artemis 5 and 6 is built by another company, and it is way smaller and way less ambitious. So even if this whole plan falls apart completely, there's a backup. But like I say, I'm not willing to predict too far ahead in terms of what's going to go on in the United States in the next little while with NASA or with anything else. But it will be interesting to watch for sure. It's winter. Dress warm if you go outside. Make sure you've got gloves. Don't think, oh yeah, I don't need to put on a hat. Yes, you do. You need to put on a hat and a scarf and 3 pairs of socks and probably every pair of long underwear you own, because it's really cold out there and astronomy is not an aerobic activity. Be warm, stay safe. Don't drive out into the middle of nowhere in a place you've never been before without someone knowing where you're going to be, without having a reliable car. I've been at the observatory and accidentally driven off the road into the ditch and gotten stuck before, and it's not fun. And I had other people there with me to help push me out and so on. You don't want to do that in the middle of nowhere in a prairie winter. And when you're driving, doesn't matter if it's clear outside. It doesn't matter if there's beautiful northern lights going on. Eyes on the road. If you're driving out of the city, that'll give you a good view. Don't look until you're able to be in a safe position. We had just a few years ago some folks get in a car accident because they were watching the sky instead of their road, and it did not end well. So make sure that you do things safely. Usually the universe isn't going to come out and bite you, but sometimes the winter might. So stay warm, stay safe, have a wonderful solstice festival, whatever your celebration of choice is, and we will see you all in 2025 with all those top 10 events and a few other surprises as well. Thanks everyone for being such a wonderful group of folks to hang around with. It's always a pleasure to see you all in the chat there. Feel free to say hi anytime. You can come by the planetarium, or you can always wrong button. You can always hit us up through Facebook, leave a comment on YouTube, or my direct email is space@manitobamuseum.ca. Love to hear from you. Love to see your images, hear your stories, see your drawings, and enjoy observing the sky. We'll catch you next year. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.